we're picking up where we left off. You were being moved by your dad when you were how old? 10, 11?
He was born in 1908, so he was...
You moved what year? It doesn't matter. So you just told a story about how he basically moved all your stuff by hand.
Right, okay.
Okay.
And then we used to ride back to get another load. But what I wanted to also say was when I lived on 320 West Main, before we moved, we had hucksters come around in a horse and wagon, and I remember that because it was a little late for horse and wagons, but because of the war, we didn't have the gas, and we had fishmen who came on Friday, and we had a vegetable man, and we had a man who ground scissors and sharpened knives, riding a bicycle. He had a wheel right on the bicycle. Wow. And we had a rag man, and he'd come around with his horse and buggy, and he'd say, "Any rags today? Any rags today?" And my mother would never give him any rags because she saved rags. But in those days, you know, this was Depression, in those days, you could, if you could save enough, you could pile them up and ship them to the Olson Rug Company.
Wow.
And they would give you credit for your weight of your rags, and then they would make a rug that you could have for very little money because you contributed the rags to make the rug. And they're long gone, but that was a big company. It was a national company. And also, during the war, we had to rinse out the tin cans and then stomp on them with our foot. You probably know about that. And then we got a
early form of recycling, right?
it was a form of recycling, but that all went for the war effort. And then you got the margarine. You didn't get butter because you had to get the food stamps for that.
I mean, ration cards.
Pardon?
You had ration cards?
The ration card, yeah, ration card. One for meat and one for the other, for butter and dairy. And the meat one, I think, was red, and the others were green. And, of course, you had the savings bonds, wartime bonds, that they sold at the movies. At the Criterion movie, they used to break up half the movie and walk around and try to make you buy stamps or whatever. And the Criterion, when I went to the Criterion as a child, it was 10 cents and 2 cents tax. And we went almost every Saturday afternoon. But anyway, when you got the margarine in a bag, it had a little orange pill in there, about the size of an aspirin. And you had to break that up with your fingers and knead the margarine to give it the yellow color. You didn't know that?
No. And what else was delivered? You had milk delivered to the house, right?
But that was not with the horse and wagon. He had a truck with ice blocks in it. And of course, he had an ice man too, if you had that kind of a refrigerator, which my mother did. And you had to have an ice pan underneath of the wooden refrigerator, and you'd have to empty it out. And if you forgot to empty it out, you ended up scrubbing your floor because it went everywhere. And sometimes the cat would get in it. And
that's trouble.
You know what happens. Anyway, but you emptied it out.
Now, can you remember when you were growing up, you said it was idyllic. Do you remember when the war was started?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was...
Give us tell us what you can remember about how you found out about it,
I
and how
heard
you
it on
felt
the radio.
about it.
I was getting undressed, changing my clothes.
Keep going.
Okay. I just don't want you to get too hot.
I was changing my clothes from Sunday school. Okay, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to make sure that I heard that. And I heard it on the radio, and it really didn't mean anything. It meant something to me, but Hawaii, I didn't know where Hawaii was. I had no idea.
This is on the attack on Pearl Harbor, you heard.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And was that the first time you were aware of the war? Or there was a
very
war
day.
going on in Europe before that.
Well, I wasn't very aware of that, although I should have been, I guess. But I was only, at that point, I was only around 6. Right. So, you know, I didn't.
Did it frighten you when you heard the story about the attack?
No, I just didn't. I didn't know what to make of it, you know.
How did your parents react?
My father wasn't there, of course. He was already in it, not in the war at that point. No, wait a minute, let me think. No, he wasn't in the war then. He was still in the Merchant Marine. But the minute that war started, December 7th, within a week he was in the Navy. They put him right in the Navy. And he, at the time that it started, he was up in Alaska on a merchant ship. And he went everywhere with that because they delivered cargo. But then he went right into the Navy because he had his pilot's license even then. In fact, I might as well, now we're on the subject, tell you why he had the pilot's license. He went to a merchant marine at the time, sort of an academy, and he went on board the USS Pennsylvania. It wasn't USS, it was US Pennsylvania, which was an 18th century sailing ship at the foot of the Market Street in the Delaware River. And they always called it the school ship. I never heard it referred to as the Pennsylvania. But they had a newspaper that they published maybe 4 times a year, an alumni paper. And he went there and graduated from there. And he was only 19. And my mother, when she graduated high school, wasn't quite 16 years old. And she had gone to Pierce Business College. And he had met my mother through her 2 older brothers. And then also his father was stationed at Fort Dix and rented a house on Chester Avenue in Morristown. And that's how my mother met him. And they, after, I think it was the day she finished Pierce, or very close to it, they got married. And he was
the day after? How long were they engaged?
Never. They just went together, and he was only 19, and my mother was, at that point, was 17.
Now this was after the war was declared,
No.
or before? Way before.
Before, 1927.
1927.
No, my mother graduated in 27. 1929, that would be.
So they were madly in love? Or?
That's what they did. They had a very good, happy marriage. No problems at all, but money problems maybe during the Depression, I know that. But anyhow, and then at the time, my mother's 2 brothers had been extremely ill. One had pneumonia, and they were all a couple of years older. And the other one had a form of encephalitis, and they were very seriously ill, both of them. And they were home on Washington Avenue where my grandparents lived, recuperating. And they were all 4 of them avid bridge players, my grandfather and grandmother and my 2 uncles. And they played a lot of bridge. So when my mother and father got married in Philadelphia, a big Methodist church, I forget which one. And in those days you didn't have to wait, just when you got a license and got married. They came home and they were playing bridge, and my mother said, "Ma, Pa, I've got something to tell you." So they had dealt a hand and they were bidding, and so they sat back with the cards in their hand and looked, and she said, "Fremont and I got married today." Silence. And then the next thing you know, and I don't know which brother it was, "Well, let's not a marriage disrupt a good bridge hand." And they continued to play.
Hold on a second.